Hey there again, hope you're doing well. So 28 years later, and a reminder that this review contains significant spoilers. Several reviews reveal plot points that can be considered spoilers, which is disappointing but understandable because discussing the film meaningfully is difficult without getting into specifics. To cut to the chase, I saw 28 years later at the Odeon Wimbledon opening night, Friday 20th, and left rather underwhelmed. It's by no means a bad movie, it's only kept me engaged with its almost 2-hour length. But what were the major issues? If you've seen the film, did you identify the same ones? Well, firstly, it didn't have the emotional resonance or uplifting quality of 28 Days Later, which was a story about the nature of how families are made and end, as much as being a fresh for the time new style of zombie movie. For me, it wasn't up there with the original in the way that Boyle's Trainspotting 2 or even Top Gun Maverick was, where the film moved the character's life story forwards in a meaningful way. This sequel doesn't build on any of the characters from the first movie. The trailer was a masterpiece at building anticipation for the theatrical release, but the film was a much more mixed affair that seemed designed to prepare the ground for the next two movies of the 28 Years Later trilogy, more than be a satisfying film in its own right. Cynically, you wonder whether the motive was to amortise the production costs across multiple films, so the same sets and actors could be reused for multiple productions, a little like the way the old big Hollywood studios used to operate. The first act is a rites of passage walkabout style trip to the mainland, where we see that the infected are involved in different ways, so now less homogenous than in the first two movies. Here we see the hallmark Garland investigation into a dystopian take on why things have come to be how they are. However, we never see any real explanation of why there are three kinds of infected: your regular fast 1 hour kills, but now also super slow slithering worm eaters and ultra Viking style zombies who are hard to kill. Oh, that would be a good film title. Thematically, it dealt with family illness and death and curiously took what looks like a stance in support of a sister dying. Though we'll need to see the sequels to better understand Dr. Kelson's euthanasia of Coma's character Isla, which felt rather sudden, with the interjection of the line about her being in pain just before she's killed by Ralph Fiennes' character. There are also clear references which are literally spelt out on the wall to the now disgraced UK celebrity Jimmy Savile, and a suggestion of the impact of fervent religious belief and how his deviant character came to be formed. But despite the nods to a thematic or moral basis of the story, the issues kept coming. Some scenes are so different they seem tonally inconsistent. Of course, there's the ending's tongue-in-cheek, fast-cut, bizarre fight scene, which seemed like a pastiche of film stars from Tarantino's Kill Bill to Guy Ritchie's Snatch via The Matrix, but equally, the humorous scenes with the Swedish soldier Eric seemed like they'd been grafted in to add some light relief and a connection to our ordinary world. Some of the dialogue is exposition heavy to the point where you wonder what the script editor was doing, or whether the budget wasn't sufficient to show rather than tell. However, at $75 million, it wasn't a cheap movie. It incorporated the incredibly moving, disturbing Taylor Holmes rendition of the Rudyard Kipling poem Boots that featured heavily in the trailer. However, it jarred in the film since there wasn't any sense of a disheartening coerced march to war, despite what's being led on by his father. It felt like, while his father may have wanted to bask in the limelight of his son's over-dramatised glory, perhaps to gain standing with the lady folk of the community, his motivation was genuinely to educate his son. In fact, he convinces the leader to take him on the walk about 2 years earlier than it seems was a norm, so the use of the recording was more style over substance. More generally, music and sound is a significant part of Boyle's movies, and the sound design was immersive, but the music, while eclectic from melodic vocal to thrash metal, didn't engage me like the 28 Days soundtrack, where John Murphy's haunting theme was accompanied by iconic pieces like Forays in Paradisum and Eno's An Ending. The soundtrack from Remember by Young Fathers is a stunningly beautiful piece, though its use in the euthanasia scene diluted its power for me. Technically, some scenes lacked visual contrast, which might reflect the technical limitations of using an iPhone as a camera body with insufficiently controlled internal light reflections, though that artifact didn't have the emotional impact of the amateur home video or CCTV soft grainy style of 28 Days. So again, even in the technical decisions, we see style over substance. Now, getting on to plot points, the infected pregnant woman's infant birth was clearly introduced to create a sense of hope, a final act of compassion and selflessness with the illness and death of the mother. The name of the baby Isla after Jodie Comer's character just hammers home a somewhat jaded message that her spirit continues. Skolder's son Spike becomes the better father and is in fact referred to by his mother as her father in some of the few genuinely touching scenes of the movie. On the other hand, Jimmy, the son of the zealous priest we were introduced to at the start of the movie in the prologue 28 years earlier, we suspect has gone down a less wholesome route, so packing in the themes to the extent that they feel underdone unlike Tropes. The second act felt unbelievable, and there's a dilapidated church sleep scene that's almost a callback to a similar scene in 28 Days Later. However, while in the first movie there were dream sequences, in this there's an unexplained reality sequence where we see the consequences of what happened overnight, but without any clear understanding of what exactly happened. Confusing. There's also a blood-stained scream-style mask that appears on scarecrows and on a person, the significance of which isn't made clear. The whiteness and shape made me wonder whether it was both foreshadowing and connected to skulls we see in the Kelson Skull Tower memorials to the dead. But again, another loose thread in the shotgun blast of this film's ideas. The gasoline fume-filled gas station scene seemed engineered just to get an explosion. We very briefly developed a connection with the Swedish soldier Eric via an awkward, partly formed gag about Scotch in the rocks. But why does he deserve to die? Because he wanted to kill a baby when thinking that course of action would keep the people he cared about safe? Maybe the message is to never lose respect for the sanctity of life, which is admirable, but then his death happened so quickly, we feel like that message is diluted. And more generally, why are there Navy patrols of the UK? Did the infection not spread to continental Europe as suggested in 28 weeks later? Either we're asked to believe that 28 weeks later never happened and the infection was kept confined to the UK, or somehow the infected were herded to the UK for containment. In either case, it doesn't seem far-fetched to consider the isolation of the UK as an allegory for Brexit, but it's just one more not fully realised idea added into the mix. The film did do some things well. The jump scares and scenes of sustained tension held me with editing that kept forward momentum throughout. The special effects, CGI and makeup were fine too, enough gore to captivate without taking you out of the experience, though the spine remaining attached to pulled off heads was rather stylised. There was a convincing sense of civilization having rapidly regressed within a generation to a more primitive state, and a growing community atavistically borrows technologies and literature from its pre-infection history. Again, maybe commentary here from Garland, and how quickly a civilized world can become uncivilized. Some performances were accomplished too, particularly from the young boy Spike played by Alfie Williams. Jodie Comer too gave a convincing performance of a loving mother struggling with disease and confusion. So in a nutshell, a curious story mix of tense horror and coming-of-age exploration of family dynamics, with some fine performances but within a production context of permitted, indulgent flights of fancy by the writer and director, with tick-in-the-box sensational scenes to drive the trailer. Maybe it's nostalgia, but I feel like 28 Days Later caught lightning in a bottle, and this film had a go at recreating that magic, but despite some accomplished performances, the themes are never sufficiently focused or developed, leaving us with a decent horror and some hackneyed tropes about the wisdom of the innocent, untainted perspective of the child and preciousness of life, that even the latter is confused by the euthanasia angle. But what did you think? I'll see you in the comments down below. Thanks to my subscribers and for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.